결승선에 들어오는 분들은 통과입니다. 그럼 시작합니다.
무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다.
324번 탈락.
병신 걸렸네. 방금
Hello there, how you do fellow kids? I'm Nanda and this is Nanda Fellow. So I take you probably seen the new Netflix show called Squid Game, and if you haven't seen, at least you probably heard of it. Squid Game is a hit, is a world phenomenon. It actually, in this present day, Netflix just published that it officially became Netflix's biggest launch ever into the platform, surpassing the British drama Bridgerton, which previously held the record. So, it's a huge phenomenon. And if you haven't watched the series yet, then maybe you're wondering, is it good? Should I see it? The short answer, yes, you should. The long answer, well... I know there are probably a lot of videos talking about the show and analysing its symbolism and, making a critique and all that. This is not what this video is about. Actually, I'm just using the success of Squid Game to talk about Korean cinema. And if you know nothing about Korean cinema, or maybe you do, but still just curious, then you should definitely keep watching this video. And just to begin with, don't worry, this video is completely free of spoilers. So, first of all, what is Squid Game then? Squid Game is a show made by Netflix which follows the main protagonist, Jihan, who is a very poor man and he's struggling with some debts, and there are a few people looking after him. He has several family issues as well, a complicated relationship with his mother and his daughter, so it's easy to relate with the character on those terms, but he's not actually a very likable character, which just makes the show more interesting to watch, I think. Because, in the first episode, I was like, okay, I don't like this man, but I understand his struggles, but I don't like him. I think he's a terrible father, but let's see where this goes. And, I just went with it and it was amazing. Me particularly, I enjoy when a character, especially a lead character, is not portrayed as someone perfect. He's someone with flaws and, he's just a human, extremely human character that you can relate to. And this man, one day, he has an encounter and he's offered an opportunity to make some money and change his life. So he takes it and then, the game begins. The game is basically just a bunch of poor people dying. You probably know this already, so there's a lot of deaths. There's a bunch of poor people dying. That's the game. I'm not gonna go too deep into that because spoilers. Anyway, why is this series good? At first, you might find it really basic criticism or all that, but it actually has lots of depths into the story, and there's a lot of layers. As you watch it, it's got only 7 episodes, but still, there's such a well-constructed narrative that is just really entertaining, and you just want to know what's gonna happen and who is behind all that. And the series does this perfectly. You capture your attention. You have to keep watching. You need to know what's gonna happen. And the reason why this is so good, and it's not basic at all, it's a social commentary, and there's a lot of works out there that touches social issues, and it does, and they do this in a good way. But I find that Korean production touches those issues in a very specific and particular way. And that's why I think Squid Game is so good and it was such a huge success. Because it's got a good narrative, because it uses social issues within the story in a clever way. And good narrative, good elements of storytelling is something that I found in common in most Korean productions that I've seen. And in the end, why is it so good then? It all comes to storytelling. So, before anything, let's make here a brief historical context. So, as you know, Korea was South Korea, because we were talking about South Korea actually. I should have addressed this sooner. Okay, so South Korea was once just one united Korea, as all of us know. The political aspects of South Korea society in general are way present in those audiovisual productions. When I talk about Korean productions and Korean cinema in general, I'm actually referring to modern South Korean cinema, which is kind of a new wave of cinema that began in somewhere in the 90s when the censorship rules of South Korea changed a little bit. And so there was this huge movement in audiovisual in general. And I think this is one of the reasons why Korean productions and Korean cinema is so specific and so particular in the way they address these social issues. This is a huge common factor in most cinematic productions of South Korea that I've seen. It doesn't matter if it's drama, comedy, or even horror movies. Actually, horror movies are the greatest example of how Korean cinema is different than what we used to see and why it's so good. Anyway, just saying that this modern Korean cinema, which is the cinema produced in the last 3 decades or so, has become basically a cinematic genre of its own. And some of the pioneers of the cinematic style is Bong Joon-ho, that you probably know from Parasite, Hong Sang-soo and Park Chan-wook. My first contact with a South Korean movie, was in, I think it's 2017, when I watched the movie called The Handmaiden by Park Chan-wook. I don't know if that's how you say his name. I looked into it. I researched, and that's what I listened, so I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong, but I think it's Park Chan-wook. Anyway. So, I've watched The Handmaiden. The Handmaiden became instantly one of my favorite movies of all times. It's just so well done, and the narrative, it's original, and there's this twist in the middle of the movie that just blew my mind. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, ever. You know, of course I've seen movies with plot twists, but I don't think I've ever seen a movie that tricked me so well, because I was completely fooled by the movie. The narrative just tricks you into believing something and then just, shattered everything. And it was done in such a good way, in such a well-constructed way, and then it all just tied together into pieces, fit perfectly into the story. This is something that Park Chan-wook does perfectly, actually. So The Handmaiden inspired me to go look for some other works by that director. So I watched some movies made by Park Chan-wook, and his storytelling process is what really got me. Like I said, this is something in common with almost all of his productions. It's not just The Handmaiden. That was something that I quickly discovered. It wasn't just one movie. Park Chan-wook has a unique style of directing and storytelling. his stories are often carried with violence, and he deals with themes such as violence and family and even romantic relations in a very particular way. And like Bong Joon-ho, who basically talks about class in most of his movies, Park Chan-wook also deals with social issues through those elements. And because of that, I was curious about Korean cinema in general, because again, it wasn't something I was familiar with. However, addressing social issues is not something particular of Park Chan-wook or Bong Joon-ho. It's actually something that I've seen in most Korean productions. And again, I believe this is something common there in those productions because of the political environment of South Korea in general. And another thing that I found in common is how they usually deal with family in their productions. Most of Korean productions I've seen, of Korean movies I've seen, always have some plot related to family. Even like horror movies or dramas, there's always something related to family, of family love and family relations. And although Korean culture is different from, I'm Brazilian. Korean culture is very different from Brazilian culture. It's very different from Western cultures in general. It's not something that, it's not a barrier. On the contrary, even more impressive how they can make you feel connected to that story and you can see yourself in that story, even with the cultural differences. Example of that is the movie House of Hummingbird, which so good. That movie's so good. Which is, I think it's from 2019 or something. And House of Hummingbird follows this girl. She's a 14-year-old girl while she struggles with family and school and love. She's just a girl trying to find love. And it's such a beautiful story, but there are some things into the story because the story, it passes on somewhere in the end of the 90s, if I remember correctly. So, and there are strong elements of Korean culture, mostly into the family and the way the family wants her to succeed. And, something that maybe you'd seem weird or just strange for us, for Westerns in general. But that at the same time, you can understand perfectly because everyone, I think everyone into the teenage years have felt like an alien in your home sometimes. So it's very easy to relate to this girl and cheer for her. I love this movie. It's one of my recommendations that I was going to talk in the end of this video, actually. Anyway, so yes, there are some common themes and some common cinematic choices in Korean productions in general. But what I like the most is, like I said, the process of storytelling and the narrative, because there's usually such an awareness and a care in each scene that you feel that it's nothing just tossed into the story. There's no loose and, everything seems to be there for a reason. And another thing, like I said, with The Handmaiden, I love the way they do plot twists because it's easy to make a plot twist out of nowhere, It's easy to use this narrative resource as your only resource. You just toss a plot twist there just for the sake of it, just for shocking value, and you might get that reaction probably. If I'm watching and there's a plot twist out of nowhere, then I'll probably be shocked. But then in the end, after you finish the movie and the emotion thrill passes on, well, you're left with an empty feeling because there was no payout. When there is no construction for that moment of the plot twist, there's no payout. It's just there. It's just something that is there. And I see this a lot with some Western productions, television productions, when they need the story to move on endlessly, like those series with 15 seasons or something. So you need the story to go on, and you have to keep creating things to keep the audience interested. So you need to have this twist so you can subvert the expectations and so they can keep watching. But there is a point when everything just becomes shallow, and your audience is not that stupid. They pick up on that. Like when you do plane crash 3 times in a series, I mean, the audience might think, okay, so they're getting a little bit off ideas. Or when you are the biggest TV show in history and you just decided to make a woman mad for no reason in the final season, then yes, you're gonna have some angry fans, sorry. Because we were waiting for something. We were waiting for this conclusion of the story. And in the final season, there was no payout whatsoever. There was just plot twists out of nowhere to subvert the expectations. And that is a practice that I particularly hate. And yeah, it got me traumatized, this final season of Game of Thrones. I'm talking about Game of Thrones, so yeah. Anyway, that's what I find so refreshing in Korean cinema in general, is that we have plot twists. They have lots of plot twists, but they're always well constructed. Like the final minutes of the movie The Wailing. If you never see, I'm not gonna, again, free of spoilers, I swear to you. Oh my god, the microphone. So the final 30 minutes or so of the movie The Wailing, it's a journey of its own. Seriously, there's a point in the movie that you're just, is he the villain? Is he the villain? Is she the villain? Am I the villain? What's going on? But it's not out of nowhere. It's incredibly well done. It tricks you, but in this very clever way. It's never just tossed in there. It makes sense to the story, and in the end, you can completely understand what was happening the whole time. It's perfect. I honestly think this movie is like a class. It's a lesson on screenwriting in general. So, yeah. So I said a lot of things now, but none of these elements that I just talked about is something inherently Korean. It's not something that we never seen before. But what I'm saying is, well, the way they use these elements are very particular. And besides good plot twists and good storytelling in general and cinematic techniques, what I love about Korean cinema is the use of the element of absurdity. So, what is this element of absurdity? Using over-exaggerated situations or absurd plot lines or situations to tell a story about real-life social issues is not something exclusively Korean, let's say it like that. But it is something that they use a lot. So, what is this element of absurdity? It means to use an over-exaggerated situation or interpretation of reality to tell what it seems like a perfectly mundane, ordinary story. It's not the same as when you use a dystopic world to tell a story, for example, that resembles a lot like our social issues. That's a different thing, I believe. For example, The Hunger Games does this very well. They depict how social issues, social problems and society problems in general through a fantasy dystopic world. That's not what I'm saying here. It's similar, but it's not the same. What I think is the element of absurdity is when you're not using a fantasy world, it's our world. For example, in Squid Game. Squid Game passes on our society. It may seem like a dystopia, but it's not a dystopic world. That's not a dystopic world. That wouldn't be impossible in our world. That's the thing. Because I've seen a lot of people talking about this, that wouldn't happen. But you don't know that. I mean, we have pretty dark shit going on in our world, like, if you think about, human traffic and all that stuff, that happens. That literally happens here. So why couldn't some billionaire? I seriously think that billionaires could literally do anything and just get away with it, you know, because that's how our society is built, and that's the critique here in Squid Game, you know, because I'm not saying that a game like Squid Game actually exists, but I'm saying that it could, and that's the difference. Because it seems absurd. Okay, it is absurd that something like that would happen here. And some people would say that, okay, no, it's impossible, that couldn't happen. But no, that's very possible actually to happen. I mean, we wouldn't know this. That's the whole thing. That's the whole plot of the TV show. We wouldn't know ever. So it's an absurd situation. But it's not an impossible situation. It's not a fantasy that could actually happen. That's what I think absurdity is about. And I think and I've seen this a lot in Korean productions. And one of those productions is Bong Joon-ho Oscar-winning picture, Parasite. So I'm going to use Parasite because I think it's like the most famous Korean movie ever. So there's no risk of spoilers. There's going to be a little bit of spoilers if you haven't seen it. But, you know, there's not much of it. Anyway, so let's make a quick recap. What is Parasite about? What's the story? We follow the Kim family as they, you know, enter Park family like parasites. Haha, humor. So their youngest son, I forgot his name, he gets a job with this really wealthy family, and the Kim family is very poor. They actually live like in the worst part of town. Blimey, there's a sewer near their house, so they're always smelling bad. Anyway, their youngest son gets a job with this wealthy family, the Parks, and they come up with this plan, this very genius plan actually, to slowly enter the family as employers as well. I mean, pretending that they don't know each other. And so if they all get jobs, then they could, you know, slowly change their lives, and that's the plan. And for that to happen, they need the current employees of the family to disappear. So that's when the genius plan comes in action. And where is the absurdity in this situation? I think this happens in some particular moments of the show, but the show of the movie. But the first is this whole entering the family as employees thing, because I think this plan just wouldn't work. I mean, it could work in reality, but it's way unlikely that would happen. So absurdity, something that could happen but most likely wouldn't happen. Anyway, so because I think that even though the Parks are really naive or some things, because rich people can be clueless about some stuff that we as normal people, we as, you know, regular folks, we understand. For example, with the whole rain situation, while the Kims got their house destroyed by the rain, the Parks treated rain like it was a gift from the heavens. They wouldn't even consider that the rain might have been bad from some people, that some people had their lives destroyed by that storm, because it's so out of their own reality that they couldn't even, you know, imagine something like that happening. So, although they're so clueless about some stuff, I think they would notice, they would find something strange in the way all of their employees, the previous employees, was just, you know, falling one after another. You know, I think they would find something weird about this. And all of those events happened just after they hired this new guy that they know nothing about. I think they would have, you know, got a little, you know, they would find these things weird. That's what I'm saying. But, that's not impossible to happen, but it's very unlikely and, absurd. I said, like 1,000 times, sorry. And then there's the whole parasite situation. I know, the movie's biggest question is who is the real parasite, but I'm talking about the actual parasite that is living under the basement. I mean, come on, that's completely absurd. That could happen, but most likely wouldn't happen. I think they would notice again. Although there are some stories that I've seen, mostly in the United States, with people like finding out that someone was living in their basement for years and they didn't know. That creeps me out a lot, actually. But anyway, I know this happened before. I know that's not impossible, but again, it's an absurd situation. And anyway, and there's a lot of things that happens in this movie that can fit in what I call this element of absurdity. And what I like about this is the way they use this element always to make these social commentaries, and they're all on point. Those critiques to our society in general are never shallow, or they always have a deep construction and meaning, and they are important to the story and they make sense within the story. So those narratives are well constructed with storytelling and in cinematic techniques in general, and the use of this element of absurdity just they complete the full package of good fucking cinema.
너 엄마는 어떻게 돌아가셨어? 너를 낳고 죽을 수 있어서 운이 좋았다고. 하나도 억울하지 않다고. 책에 나오는 동물하는 건 이런 것일까?
But again, this is not something that only Korean productions do. This is not exclusive, but it's not that common in Western productions or in Hollywood productions, for example, much less in the mainstream productions. For example, the movie Get Out by Jordan Peele uses this element of absurdity to tell about real life issue, which is racism, and he does this quite well. But again, this is not as common in Western productions as it is in Korean productions. And the way that the Korean cinema works with these elements are just quite unique, because the narrative are always so well constructed, and there are nearly always things from Korean culture imbued into those stories, into those narratives, in this natural, flowing way. The movies usually trusts you to understand subtlety. It trusts you to be clever enough to understand the story without, chewing it out for you. The narrative doesn't need to explicitly explain everything to you. They trust you to understand subtlety and symbolism on your own. So, in conclusion, as I said, modern South Korean cinema became practically a genre of its own. And there's not only Bong Joon-ho and Park Chan-wook. I just mentioned them because they're kind of one of the pioneers of this movement, and probably the most famous too. But if you like Squid Game, then I recommend you to watch some other K-dramas, which is like some TV productions in Korea. And I strongly recommend you to check out some Korean cinema productions, which is the point of this whole video. So there are some of my personal recommendations for you. I'm going to start off with the classic, the movie The Host by Bong Joon-ho. So, The Host follows the story in which a careless American military doctor, he dumped some chemicals into this river, this lake. And then, some years later, this creature emerges from the water, from the river, and starts attacking people and terrorizing the country, basically. It became a whole international thing. And the protagonist, he's just there by accident at the time. And his daughter is abducted by this creature. but he sees that his daughter is alive. She is still alive. So he shared what he saw with his family. And when they try to bring it up to the authorities, they say that, okay, the girl is already dead, then there was nothing they could do. So the only solution for the family and for this desolated father was to look for the girl and the monster on their own. I mean, this seems like a very basic plot, you may think, okay, so I've seen stories like this, but believe me, this is no ordinary plot. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but I'm not going to say much so you don't get spoilers. Just watch. One more thing, this movie is from 2006, and the CGI is not that good. I mean, the creature looks a little bit, let's say, grotesque, kind of, but I think was kind of intentional and kind of because of the low budget. But this doesn't comes in the way to the story whatsoever. The movie is very good, believe me. Anyway, next film I strongly suggest you watch is called The Wailing. I've talked about it a few minutes ago. The Wailing follows the story of a small city, like a little town, who starts to get some attacks. And some of the residents believe this is some sort of curse, or because a demonic spirit apparently lives into the woods in the form of an old man. That is the local belief. But of course, the police officers don't really believe that at first, but then a series of strange things begin happening, and when the daughter of one of the police officers, she starts acting really weird, and everything starts to get affected, they kind of start believing that this is some sort of demonic power going on. Anyway, I don't know, you don't know, no one knows it. I'm not gonna say anything further because again, spoilers. So I strongly suggest you watch The Wailing. It's probably one of the best horror movies I've ever seen. It's a masterpiece. Another psychological horror movie that I particularly enjoy is called A Tale of Two Sisters by Tijuan. So this movie follows two sisters who came back from an institution, and they have to deal with this weird acting stepmother and what it seems to be like the ghost of their former mother, who passed. You don't know what is happening, and I'm not going to say anything further because again, and this movie is one of those movies that is best if you watch when you don't know anything about the movie, so just see it. So this is one of my recommendations. Actually, horror Korean movies in general are just good. They're all generally very good. So if you see any horror movie and it's Korean, you should probably watch it. And next on this list we have Peppermint Candy by Lee Shandong. I think this is how you pronounce it. So this movie is from 1999, and it follows it's like a non-linear backward story. We see this man commit suicide first, and then the story goes backwards so we can understand how it came to that point. I particularly love stories like that. I love stories like that. So this movie got me at first hand. Anyway, I'm not gonna say anything that much because I think you should just see it, but it's very good. Next on the list is Mother by Bong Joon-ho. Mother is a drama, but as other Bong Joon-ho films, there is a sort of thriller element involving mother, and we're gonna see the story of this widow who has a mentally challenged son, and as a series of weird stuff and start happening, it's like one thing after another. And again, I'm not gonna say anything much about this movie, but it's very good and it's by Bong Joon-ho, so yeah, it's good. By the way, one thing to keep in mind about Bong Joon-ho movies is that he nearly always talks about class throughout metaphors with his films. So pay attention to those elements while you're watching Mother. That's my only tip. Next on the list is one of my favorite movies ever. It's this coming of age story called Take Care of My Cat by Jang Jae-yeon. By Jang Jae-yeon. So Take Care of My Cat follows the story of these 5 former best friends. They just finished school. This is a classic come of age in that sense. They just finished high school. Hae-jo, which is one of the girls, she moves to Seoul, the capital, and they begin to slowly drift apart. So we follow these girls. The remaining girls, we have Ji-young. Ji-young is my favorite. Ji-young, she's very poor. She lives with her grandparents in this falling to pieces house. And we have the 2 twin sisters who are living alone and struggling in life, and they're selling candy to pay the bills. We also have Tae-hee, who is sort of middle class girl, and she just wants freedom because her parents are very strict and they have a specifically life planned for her, and she doesn't want that exactly. And throughout the movie, we see this cat. His cat name is Titi, and he's like a symbolism for the friendship of the girls. I'm not gonna tell that much, but I think I told that like 5 times already. But this cat, he shows up a lot, and you should pay attention in the scenes that he shows up, because again, there's a whole symbolism involving the girls and the friendship and the cat. Well, the main reason why I loved this movie so much is that you can get connected with the girls and that story so easily. The movie is very sensitive and funny and charming. It's lovely to watch. Seriously, I strongly recommend you to watch Take Care of My Cat. Next on the list is House of Hummingbird by Bora Kim. I mentioned this movie early, real quickly, that it follows this 14-year-old girl as she goes throughout the story discovering love. This is basically the description. I'm not gonna say too much about it, because again, I talked about this movie previously in this video, so this is one of my recommendations, definitely, because it's also one of my favorite ones. So House of Hummingbird by Bora Kim. And finally, number 1, and not even because it's my favorite, but I think because it's definitely one of the most well-done movies I've ever seen. There's some dogs barking, but anyway, which is the movie Old Boy by Park Chan-wook.
아저씨, 내가요 아무리 짐승만도 못한 놈이라도요 살 권리.
Old Boy is a 2003 movie, and it follows the life of this man into a series of, let's just call it complicated situations. It's a very bloody movie. It's an action movie, and it's very violent and bloody, and that is there's an exaggeration in the scenes, because it's all very extreme. And this is another characteristic of Korean cinema, as I discussed earlier. Actually, if you see Old Boy and if you like action movies, then you should definitely check out the whole trilogy of Vengeance that we say it. It's not called a trilogy because the stories are connected in any way. They're not. It's just because of the common theme in them, which would be Old Boy, Mr. Vengeance, and Lady Vengeance, which is my favorite one. So you should see the other ones, but Old Boy is just a classic. It became a classic in action movies, so it couldn't be out of this list. And of course, you should definitely check out The Handmaiden that I talked about it before. It's my favorite one. And if you haven't seen Parasite, you should. And just make a quick mention to Memories of a Murderer, Secret Sunshine, and Burning. They're all great movies, and if you're willing to, you should definitely watch them as well. Anyway, I think we finally come to an end. So if you like this video, please hit the like button below. And let me know what you think in the comment. And if you have some recommendations of your own, please feel free to leave it on the comments as well. And of course, please subscribe for more videos about anything really. I don't know what I'm going to talk about next. I think I'm going to talk about some webtoons. I don't know. We'll see. So, that was it. Bye bye.
너 이리 와. 나 면상이를 내. 너 이거 안 놔, 이 새끼?
10만 원입니다. 축하드립니다.